We've got Rita presenting next. So Rita, thanks very much for being patient, and if you want to start, that would be great.
Perfect, thank you so much. Let's see if I can get my slides up. So hello everybody. The title of my talk is Leading Constituted in Parallel with Less Hierarchical Organizing. So my name is Rita Järventie-Thesleff and I work as a professor of practice. By the way, we had my background also in forest industry and currently as the SEMS academic director at Aalto University School of Business in Helsinki, Finland. By the way, we had the photos. I bring a greeting from Finland to you and about the Finnish nature, which was also very much in focus in yesterday's keynote speeches, the environmental crisis. This paper is actually a spin-off of another paper which is currently in a review process that I have co-authored with Pekka-Maria Laine from University of Lapland, also here in Finland. And in that paper currently in review, we focus on less hierarchical organizing, and we're originally thinking that topic and suggestions for further research would be then leadership. Self-managed and less hierarchical organizations have recently been subject to a growing interest in organization and management studies. The interest has been fostered by examples of large organizations such as Buurtzorg and Morningstar that have removed hierarchical structures, titles, and changed their meeting routines. Furthermore, the future of work seems to increasingly favor various self-managed ways of organizing and more participatory approach to leadership. As these self-managed ways of organizing are gradually becoming more common, both academic and managerial interest in redefining leadership has grown. However, I argue that to date, research on leadership in self-managed organizations, SMOs as they are called, is still relatively scarce and tends to draw from an onto-epistemological understanding based on which organizations, practices, cultures, communities, organizational actors, and markets exist there to be examined. In this study, I do not begin with an assumption that there is an entity called a less hierarchical organization. Instead, this study draws from feminist performative theory in and through which the actions are seen as performative. So I build on ideas of Karen Barad, Judith Butler, and François Koren. Drawing on feminist performative theorizing, I examined how leading and less hierarchical organizing were entangled in continuously constituted web of relations that were studied also in this earlier paper by Pekka-Maria Laine and myself. With performative theorizing, hence, there are no organizations or organizational practices. Organizational members do not exist as such, but are enacted through action. The communicative constitution of organizing approach, which is also called the CCO approach, examines how communicative events, linguistic and other behavior constitute, produce and reproduce, and alter coordination and control of activity and knowledge, as well as the question, who is who in relation to whom? For example, for Judith Butler, there is no doer behind the deed. Instead, the subject is constituted in and through actions. Additionally, Butler draws from Michel Foucault, who has shown to us that all phenomena are constituted within web of directions. Baradian new materialist performative thinking enables us to understand the sensuousness of human bodies and the affective intensities emanating with the entangling of co-constitutive actions. Humans are not separate beings, but continuously becoming in and through the entangling process of actions. Butlerian thinking, in turn, allows us to focus on how certain webs of relations are identifiable as more established ways of relating in a certain time and space, given even though these relations are continuously reconstructed. So let's look at the case. The empirical case of this study is a Nordic fashion and lifestyle magazine, which is directed to readers younger than 35 years of age that are interested in latest trends, well-being, lifestyle, and contemporary societal phenomena. The data came to consist of 2 rounds of personal interviews with the editorial team of the magazine, consisting of 8 to 9 people only. Between these 2 interview rounds, also half-a-day workshop was held, where results of the first interview round were discussed and ideas for the development of work were generated. Analyzing the data, I have adopted a post-qualitative research approach, according to which data has agency within the process of intertwining data, theory, and sentient actors. Even though the interviews and the workshop had certain time and space, the data was continuously created while we, now I refer also to the other paper in review process, analyzed it through reading, sensing, and writing. Immersed with the material and the sensation it evoked as we read the interviews over and over again. We wrote down various expressions about work, cooperation, ideating, hierarchy, control, decision-making, change, and identities of organizational actors. Traditional leadership approaches have been criticized by being excessively leader-centric and poorly suited for less hierarchical organizations. And the need to study alternative co-constructed aspects of leadership have been emphasized. Especially when it comes to knowledge work, there seems to be a need to develop leadership at all levels of organizations. For example, several scholars have argued that self-managing organizations need a lot of leadership and very few leaders. I echo this observation and see a need for more research on the relationship between leadership in plural and less hierarchical organizing. In this paper, leadership is seen as relational, dynamic, collectively constructed, processual, cultural, and highly contextual phenomenon. I look at leadership as an emergent and collectively produced meaning-making activity. In the analysis, I also drew on Sandberg and Pingington paper from 2009, where they studied competence and stated that the notion of human way of being in essential ontology conceptualizes competence not primarily as a thing or entity we possess, but rather something we embody and enact in the sense of what we do and at the same time are. I extend this to leadership in order to see how such an understanding is constituted that supports joint meaning-making and joint endeavors. First, I look at understanding of self. The interviewees described a very strong relationship to the magazine, which seemed to be based on having a loyal long-term subscriber of the magazine, for admiring the style and the journalist approach of the magazine, or for identifying with the lifestyle portrayed by the publication. In the web of relations among the editorial team, the journalists seemed to embody the spirit of ideal workers, whose very personhood became a loyal reflection of the magazine. When co-producing the magazine, the staff seemed to be characterized by a certain degree of self-abandonment. Next, I look at the understanding of work and others. In general, the responsibility for producing a high-level, beautiful and consistent publication issue after issue seemed to be a matter of honor for the members of editorial staff. All respondents underlined strong internal collaboration, good spirit and teamwork among colleagues. The teamwork materialized in generating and building on others' ideas. The ideation or brainstorming seemed to be unplanned and unpremeditated, taking place as much over a cup of coffee in connection with informal discussions as in weekly editorial meetings. Being with other members of the editorial staff developed each and every individual by taking on other humans' ways of being. The interaction among the members of the editorial office seemed to build a framework of mutual accountability, and the members seemed to become environments for each other. Still on understanding of work and others. So furthermore, high work morale and professional ambition seem to be characteristic to all interviewees. A license to get excited in the web of relations and seem to create a mechanism by which this kind of active passion could be enacted. Next, I compare these preliminary findings to the findings of our paper currently in review process, and look at the web of relations constituted, on the other hand, by relations of love and enthusiasm, vulnerability, entrepreneurial accountability, and by relations of money and routine. So vulnerability as an ontological way of existence in relation to each other, based on openness to oneself and the other. Within the relations of vulnerability, the journalists are attached with strong affectual and emotional ties. Love and enthusiasm create an especially intimate relationship between the journalist and the magazine by investing a strong emotional bond with the magazine. Submitting to entrepreneurship provides freedom for having an impact on one's work. Strong sensations emanate within the relations of entrepreneurship, such as within the relations of vulnerability and love. But however, the dynamics of vulnerability, love and enthusiasm might become resisted within the relations of routines, which provide hierarchy between organizational members. Relations of love and enthusiasm can also be resisted by questioning the enthusiasm amid new financial objectives or ever-increasing workload. Relations of entrepreneurial accountability can also be resisted within the relations of routines and money, which enable the positioning of journalists just as an employee. To conclude, my preliminary analysis shows that leadership and less hierarchical organizing constitute and are constituted in parallel in similar relationships. I argue that in addition to organizational rules, principles, and guidelines that might prevail or be the basis for SMOs, leadership in these types of organizations is built dialectically in the web of relations. Power and resistance coexist and constitute each other in a dynamic process in and through which both organizing and leading unfold and are in continuous process of becoming. Based on this study, leadership resides in and is mediated by social relations and becomes part of surrendering to a social habit. And that's it.
Thanks, Rita. Really interesting. And thank you for prompting my memory, which I suggested to Sarah earlier on. I was trying to remember Smirchich and Morgan back in '82. I think they defined leadership as the management of meaning, or
correct,
leaders managing to succeed in forming the reality of others. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And I'll invite questions from the floor, because as I tried to say earlier, it's not my role to dominate these discussions. So yeah, thank you. Questions? Magnus?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's sort of inspiring, really inspiring and interesting. And let me just try and have a go at one thing. Because along your presentation, I think I lost a little bit track of, you're sort of presenting this image of a very engaged community where people seem to invest a lot in their professional identity and love and care for this journal and how they produce things collectively. So I see and hear something about their commitment and their engagement and their identification with this small organization. But I think I sort of lost track a little bit along the way of what in all this what would you call leadership and why? So what about it is leadership? There's a lot of relationships, there's a lot of investment in it, but where in all this would you call something specific leadership and why? And how would you empirically tease it out?
So as I said, so this is a spin-off paper of another paper where we looked at self-managed organizing instead of, as we know from Morningstar and Burzog, that they define certain characteristics and rules and principles that the people are supposed to follow in order to constitute these self-managed organizations. And in this previous paper, we looked at the continuous organizing which emerged in the web of relations. And now, since there seems to be very little research on leadership in the self-managed organizations, so instead of again looking at the rules and the principles, we follow the approach in the previous paper, so post-qualitative and performative approach. So as we in this paper, or I do define that the leadership is the meaning making, and how that meaning making emerges in this web of relations among the members of this small editorial team of only 8 or 9 people. But then also a question back to you, dear audience, is that then I added one additional layer, and that layer is the inspiring article by Pinnington from 2009, where they look at competencies, but based on the existential ontology. So I was looking at then the understanding of work, self, and others in this context of self-managed organizing, and we're thinking that would they be in a way aspects or characteristics that then shed light on the emergence of leadership as meaning making.
Thanks, Rita. I've got, does that answer your question, Magnus?
Yeah, cool, thank you.
Thank you. So question from Dermot.
Hi, Rita, thanks for that interesting presentation. I've just got a couple of little questions. One, could you tell us a little bit more about the organization? Is it for profits? Is it a hobby club? You know, how is it set up? You know, what you said that there's less hierarchical. So if you could talk through maybe the hierarchy of it or its organizing principles, that would be really useful. And then the second question, you mentioned that you regard data as having agency. It's just useful if you could describe to me, well, what type of agency does data have, and what is it a different type of agency to human agency? If you could just talk me through that, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Wonderful questions, by the way. First of all, so the magazine was one of 4 magazines in a small publishing house. And yes, it was a regular publishing house for profit. But this was maybe the crown jewel of this publishing house, and had a very established position in the monthly women's magazines, if you so wish. But the very special characteristics, as I described earlier, so following the trends, but also discussing societal phenomena, expressing clear attitudes. Pekka-Maria Laine, who is my co-author in that other paper, did not collect the interview data, but was my partner in facilitating the workshop in between the two interview rounds. And it was really something that we felt in us, and in the spirit of this workshop, how really engaged and committed and identified with this organization and the publication the journalists were. So it was something really, really special. So in then analyzing the data, especially for this paper, which is now already in the review process, this what I'm presenting here is very much still work in progress. But we wanted to go back to those feelings and the affects, if you so wish, and the sensuousness of us as, in a way, part of the entire setting. So in that sense, reading, writing, discussing, what then Pekka and I did after reading the transcripts of all these interviews and going back to the workshop data, how that resonated with us. So in that sense, it was part of the analytical process, then like in a way becoming immersed with the data also throughout the analytical process.
Thanks, Rita. Derma, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any others? I can't see any hands up. Please do put your hands up and I'll bring you in. A question from me, Rita. You've mentioned that, and you've described this group as self-managing and hierarchy less. Was there a lead editor? And if so, how did that relationship work? And secondly, in terms of, you say they're profit making, and you mentioned that they're one of the, let's say, most admired elements or magazines. Were they particularly profitable themselves? And what impact that then has on the overall group driving leadership?
Good. Thank you for those questions as well. As I mentioned also briefly in my presentation, I compared the self-managed, managing, organizing, and leading. And in this other paper of ours, the web of relations, we had the love, the vulnerability, and the entrepreneurial accountability. But there were, in a way, if you so witness, counter forces, which were like routines, and then also money, the financial aspects. So yes, there was a structure in this magazine, as is usual for magazines, that there is the holy trinity, the editorial-in-chief and the boss of the editorial process, and then the art director. So in that sense, there were loose hierarchies also, if you so wish. But the journalists were extremely independent in doing the magazine. I was also asking them about the brand, and they said that, you know, the brand statement is ridiculous because we are the living and kicking brands. So the ones who do the brand, which I think was also a lovely quote. And then your second question was? Financials.
Yeah, the financial, and
yeah.
If they were particularly profit making, let's say, or they made more profit than other magazines within the group, did that give them more independence in terms of their leading or leadership of the brand and the magazine?
That's also a very good question, because this data is already gathered a couple of years ago, and actually the small publishing house was sold to a bigger Nordic publishing house, and I suppose part of the reason was also the financial of the entire publishing group. But as said, this particular magazine was the ground jewel of the small publishing house, and also the driver, I think, why the entire publishing house was acquired by a bigger one. It would be super interesting to go back to the journalists now as part of one of the big publishing houses in the Nordic market, and see whether they are still able to produce the magazine in similar atmosphere as they were in the smaller publishing house. Because I did interview one of the journalists in the new premises, and she was very unhappy, super unhappy, to be quite honest, because the working routines or practices, since we are talking very much about practices here as well, was to benefit of synergy effects among different, also similar type of publications in the publishing house directed to similar type of segments. And that was also then considered a threat to these leading or self-managing ways of organizing and leading that was constituted in the earlier setting. So it would be interesting to continue. But here, as said, we really sensed the very special atmosphere prevailing in the setting at the time of the study.
Thank you. Yeah, the financial independence of a unit or a group reminds me of an article by I think it was Franco Matos looking at SMEs, and they drew parallels with management by exception from transformational transactional leadership, and how some of the research I did a few years ago, how leaders of SMEs looked at particular areas of the business, and if it was profit making, they left it alone. So whilst you could describe it as self-managing, it was could also be described, in my view, as management by exception. They didn't think they needed to lead a group of people that were doing quite nicely financially.
A very good point. Thank you.
So thank you very much, you all. I'm conscious of the time. We've run slightly over, but I didn't want to stop any of the really great presentations that we've had this morning. Thanks hugely to Hazel, who's been our technical support. Without Hazel, no doubt, I probably wouldn't have got through this. So thanks to Hazel. Thanks to all that that have presented. And I'll let you go now and grab a tea, coffee, etc. And hopefully see you in some of the sessions later today and tomorrow.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Rita, and thanks to the other presenters. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.